Now then, gather round for a tale that proves the old adage. Never trust anyone who calls themselves your real parents while simultaneously asking you to disown your actual ones. It's rather like claiming to be a vegetarian whilst tucking into a Sunday roast. The mathematics simply don't add up. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Because nothing says family bonding quite like crowdsourcing your global audience whilst your offspring plots your demise. Our story begins, as many domestic tragedies do, with a daughter asking her father for money. Emily swept into Bob's modest sitting room like a hurricane in designer heels, already calculating how much of his pension she could extract before he'd had time to properly fold his evening paper. "Dad, I need $35,000 for the wedding," she announced, with all the delicacy of bailiffs serving eviction papers. "This is the most important day of my life." Now, Bob was the sort of chap who'd spent 40 years in banking, which means he understood numbers the way a vicar understands sin, intimately and with considerable wariness. £35,000 represented nearly a quarter of his entire retirement savings, accumulated through decades of sensible sandwiches and holidays in Blackpool rather than Barbados. "Sweetheart," he said, adjusting his reading glasses with the careful precision of a man buying time. "Sit down. Let's discuss this properly." But Emily was having none of it. She'd already mentally spent the money on flowers that would wilt by Tuesday, and photographers whose artistic vision apparently cost more than most people's annual salaries. "There's nothing to discuss," she declared, pacing about his sitting room like a caged leopard. "The Thompsons have already put down deposits. Everything's arranged. I just need you to cover your share." The Thompsons, you see, were Emily's prospective in-laws. The sort of people who believed that love could indeed be measured in pounds sterling, and that family loyalty was directly proportional to one's ability to write enormous checks without flinching. Bob pulled out his bank statements, those stark documents that told the unvarnished truth about a life lived within one's means. "Look, honey," he said gently, "this is what I have after your mother's medical bills, after funeral expenses. I can manage $8,000. That's genuinely all I can afford. £8,000, a sum that would have seemed princely to Bob's father, who'd raised 5 children on a doctor's wage. But to Emily, it was an insult wrapped in disappointment and served with a side of social embarrassment. 8,000, she reacted as though he'd offered her pocket change for a cup of tea. That's pathetic. What followed was a sort of family row that would make the neighbors pause midway through their evening programs. Emily knocked his bank statements to the floor, scattering them amongst family photographs like financial confetti. She spoke of the Thompsons' generosity, of Richard's second mortgage and Margaret's sacrifice jewelry, painting Bob as a man whose modest pension represented moral failure rather than a lifetime of honest work. "The wedding dress alone costs more than your offering," she spat, standing over her father as he knelt to collect his scattered papers. "Do you know how embarrassing it is when they ask about my father's contribution? When I have to explain that my dad used to be somebody, but now he's just what, Emily?" She hesitated for precisely the length of time it takes to choose between wounding and destroying. "Just a failure." There are words that, once spoken, hang in the air like smoke from a house fire. You can see them, smell them, but you can't take them back. Bob remained crouched by his coffee table, holding both his bank statements and his late wife's photograph, whilst his daughter's assessment of his worth settled into the silence like ash. Margaret's eyes seemed different in the photograph now, sadder somehow, as if she too had heard their daughter's verdict on the man she'd loved for 35 years. 3 days passed in relative quiet. Bob pottered about his garden, reorganized his closets, and read the sort of novels that reminded him of a time when family loyalty wasn't subject to market fluctuations. His phone sat on the kitchen table, notifications piling up like autumn leaves, but he felt no compulsion to answer Emily's increasingly frantic calls. It was whilst checking his Facebook, a social media platform he joined primarily to see photographs of his granddaughter's school plays, that he discovered Emily's latest public declaration. "Finally found real parents," she'd written, beneath photographs of herself with the Thompsons. "Thank you, Richard and Margaret, for making dreams come true. Blessed new family. Real parents." The phrase had a particular sting to it, rather like being told your lifetime's work had been merely a placeholder until professionals arrived. Bob screenshot the post with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 4 decades documenting financial irregularities. The comments section bloomed with congratulations for Emily's real family, each message another small knife twist. Not one mention of the man who'd walked the floors with her through chicken pox, paid for her university education, and held her hand through her mother's final illness. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Don't come to my wedding. You're not my family anymore." Bob stared at the message for several minutes, then typed 2 words. "I understand." Now, most fathers might have responded with hurt, anger, or desperate appeals for reconciliation. But Bob was a banker by training and temperament, which many approached problems with a sort of systematic analysis that had once caught embezzlers who thought themselves terribly clever. If Emily wanted to replace him with the Thompsons, perhaps it was time to discover exactly what sort of people these real parents actually were. Stephen Clark had been Bob's colleague at the bank before establishing his own private investigation firm. The sort of thorough, methodical chap who could trace a paper trail through a blizzard and emerge with a complete financial profile. "I need some information about Richard and Margaret Thompson," Bob explained over the phone. "Complete background check." Within a week, Stephen had assembled a dossier that would have made MI5 proud. The Thompsons, it transpired, were running a rather sophisticated money laundering operation through their restaurant. The sort of criminal enterprise that made Al Capone look like an amateur. They're evading at least $400,000 in taxes, Stephen reported over coffee in a quiet corner of Riverside Cafe. Phantom catering companies, inflated invoices, cash payments from sources that exist only in their imagination. Bob studied the evidence with the satisfaction of a man whose professional instincts had proven sound. Bank statements showed deposits from catering services that had never catered anything more elaborate than a school jumble sale. Tax returns claiming poverty while simultaneously purchasing luxury cars and country club memberships. "They're not just stealing from the government," Bob observed, his trained eye spotting the patterns. This level of sophistication suggests they're laundering money for other people as well. Emily's generous real parents were common criminals, funding her dream wedding with stolen money, whilst lecturing Bob about his modest pension's inadequacy. The irony was rather delicious. When Emily finally appeared on his doorstep 3 days later, clutching white roses, and looking like someone who discovered that unanswered phone calls can be more unsettling than answered ones, Bob was ready. "Dad, I know I hurt you," she began, "but you have to understand, weddings are stressful." "Of course, sweetheart. I understand completely." She blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. Bob invited her in, made tea in his late wife's china cups, and listened whilst Emily explained that her Facebook post had been misunderstood and that the Thompsons were merely being supportive. "They want to invite you for dinner tomorrow night," she said hopefully. "They want to clear the air, start fresh." Dinner with criminals who'd stolen his daughter's affections with laundered money? Bob could think of few things he'd enjoy more. Thompson's fine dining occupied the sort of building that screamed expensive and architectural semaphore. All glass and steel, with valet parking and the kind of clientele who discussed their tax avoidance strategies over the wine list. Richard Thompson rose as Bob approached their table, extending his hand with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his welcome anywhere. "Robert, welcome to our little place." Little place? The restaurant probably cost more than Bob's house, and was apparently funded by creative accounting that would have impressed Charles Dickens. The evening unfolded like a masterclass in criminal arrogance. Richard ordered wine that cost more than Bob's monthly pension, whilst casually mentioning his expanded catering services, the same Phantom company Stephen had investigated. Margaret discussed Emily's wedding budget with the casual air of someone spending other people's money, which, technically speaking, she was. Bob sipped his expensive wine and discreetly photographed suspicious transactions happening at neighboring tables. Cash changed hands without receipts. Envelopes disappeared into servers' aprons. And the Thompsons presided over it all with the benevolent authority of successful criminals. "Business seems good," Bob observed mildly. "Outstanding," Richard puffed with pride. "The profit margins are incredible." Indeed they were, when one didn't bother reporting half the income to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. As the evening progressed, Bob counted 17 suspicious transactions whilst Richard regaled them with stories that inadvertently revealed more criminal activity. The man was rather like a burglar, giving a guided tour of his methods. Informative, but ultimately self-incriminating. "You know, Robert," Margaret said with the patronizing tone wealthy people reserve for charity cases, "we understand your limitations. Fixed income, modest savings. That's why we stepped in." Bob nodded humbly, whilst mentally calculating how many federal agencies would be interested in the evidence he was gathering. The following week passed in methodical preparation. Bob transformed his dining room into a command center, organizing Stephen's investigation files with the same precision he'd once applied to quarterly audits. He drafted complaints to multiple agencies: the tax authorities, the fraud squad, anyone who might take professional interest in the Thompsons' creative approach to bookkeeping. 3 separate envelopes, mail from different post offices, ensuring the investigation would arrive from multiple directions like a perfectly coordinated pincer movement. But federal investigations take months to develop, and Emily's wedding was in 5 days. For his daughter's special day, Bob prepared a rather different sort of gift. Emily's wedding was everything the Thompsons' money could buy. 12,000 pounds worth of flowers, crystal chandeliers, and a sort of elegant excess that only stolen money can purchase with such casual confidence. Bob arrived precisely on time, carrying a sealed envelope that felt warm against his fingers. "Dad." Emily rushed over, radiant in silk and lace. "You're here. I have something for you," Bob said gently. "A special wedding gift. Make sure you open it tonight, when you have time to read it properly." The envelope contained copies of every incriminating document Stephen had uncovered, arranged chronologically to tell the complete story of Thompson criminality. Bank statements, fake invoices, tax returns, a comprehensive portrait of the people Emily had chosen as her real parents. On the cover page, Bob had written a simple note: "So you can see who your real parents actually are. Love, Dad." Emily tucked the envelope into her bridal bag, next to her lipstick and tissues. Completely unaware, she was carrying evidence that would destroy her new family's carefully constructed facade. The ceremony proceeded with elaborate pomp. Richard Thompson walked Emily down the aisle, the honor he claimed along with everything else. Bob sat in the 3rd row, watching his daughter marry into a criminal enterprise, whilst 200 guests celebrated Thompson's generosity. The reception lasted 4 hours. Dinner, toasts, dancing, all of it funded by tax evasion and money laundering. Bob watched patiently as Emily finally reached for a bridal bag, withdrawing the sealed envelope with curious fingers. "What's this, Dad?" she called across the ballroom. "Open it, sweetheart. It's something special." Emily broke the seal carefully, unfolding Bob's cover letter first. Her smile faded as she read, then disappeared entirely as she examined the documents beneath. Bank statements showing unreported income, fake catering invoices, tax returns claiming poverty whilst living in luxury. Page after page of professionally documented Thompson crimes, spread across the white tablecloth like evidence in a courtroom. "Emily?" Jason leaned over, concerned. "What is it?" The ballroom began to quiet as guests noticed the drama unfolding at the head table. "Is this true?" Emily looked up at the Thompsons, documents trembling in her hands. "Are you really stealing money?" Richard's face flushed purple. "That's all lies. Your father's just jealous because we could give you what he couldn't." "Jealous?" Bob rose from his seat, walking calmly toward the head table. "No, Richard. I just wanted my daughter to know the truth about her new parents." 200 wedding guests watched as Bob announced the details. For 100,000 pounds in tax evasion, money laundering through fake catering services, Emily's dream wedding funded by criminal activity. The elegant reception transformed into a scandal, captured by photographers who'd been hired to document Thompson's triumph, but instead recorded their public destruction. Emily stared at the evidence, then at the Thompsons, then back at the documents that proved her real parents were common criminals. "All this time," she whispered, "all your generosity, it was stolen money." Margaret tried desperately to control the damage, but too late. Guests were photographing the evidence with their phones, spreading the scandal in real time across social media. The very platforms Emily had used to celebrate her new family now documented their downfall. "You bought me with money you stole from other people," Emily said, her voice hollow with devastation. Bob watched as the Thompsons' faces crumbled, their carefully constructed facade collapsing like a house of cards in a stiff breeze. "Now," he said quietly, "justice happens." 5 days later, Emily stood on Bob's doorstep with tears streaming down her face and her arms full of expensive gifts. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was a terrible daughter." She collapsed into a sitting room chair, still wearing designer clothes but looking smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her discoveries. "You're my daughter, Emily, and I'll always love you. But now you know the difference between people who really love you and people who just want to use you." Emily had brought back everything. The jewelry, the clothes, the handbag, thousands of pounds worth of gifts, each one a small bribe to buy her loyalty. "How can you forgive me after everything I said to you?" "Because real love doesn't have a price tag," Bob replied gently. And that's something the Thompsons will never understand. They spent the afternoon going through old family albums. Photographs of Emily's childhood funded by Bob's modest salary, but rich in genuine affection. Birthday parties in their small back garden. Family holidays to seaside towns. Christmas mornings with presents wrapped in last year's paper. None of it glamorous, but all of it real. "I want to have a proper blessing," Emily said as they closed the last album. "Just us, maybe a few real friends. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just honest. I'd like that very much." As Emily prepared to leave, gathering up the expensive gifts to donate to charity, she hugged her father tightly. "I'm sorry it took criminals and a federal investigation for me to realize what I already had. The important thing is that you understand now." After she left, Bob sat in his sitting room surrounded by family photographs and memories. The expensive gifts were gone, replaced by something far more valuable. His daughter's love and respect, earned honestly this time. His phone rang. Stephen Clark with news that Thompson's Fine Dining had been closed by the authorities. Richard and Margaret facing serious prison time for tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud. The local paper wanted to interview Bob. Hero father exposes criminal in-laws, but he declined. Some victories don't require publicity. Outside, spring was turning to summer, the season of new beginnings. Bob's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thank you for loving me enough to tell me the truth, even when it hurt." Bob smiled and set the phone aside. Justice had been served. His daughter was safe, and sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly enough. In a few weeks, Emily would have her honest wedding blessing. Simple, modest, real. Everything the Thompsons' extravaganza wasn't, and infinitely more valuable for being genuine. Rather fitting, really. After all, the best gifts in life don't come with price tags. They come with truth, loyalty, and the sort of love that can't be bought, no matter how much stolen money one has to spend.